On Father's Day morning, I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at a single card propped against my coffee mug. It wasn't from my daughter Melissa, it was from my neighbor's 7-year-old son, who'd drawn me a crayon picture of us working in the garden together. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed with photos from Melissa's elaborate Father's Day celebration for her husband's father, complete with custom gifts, professional photography, and a catered brunch. She'd forgotten me entirely, but she'd remembered Richard perfectly. That's when I decided to call my realtor about the house I'd been quietly purchasing for her family's future. Some lessons can only be learned through loss, and my daughter was about to get an education in consequences that money couldn't buy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning started like any other Sunday in June, except it wasn't any other Sunday. It was Father's Day 2024, and I'd been awake since 5:30, not from excitement, but from a nagging feeling in my chest that had become all too familiar over the past few years. I made my coffee in the same ceramic mug Melissa had given me when she was 12, back when handmade gifts and sticky hugs were her specialty. Now, at 34, she had different priorities. I walked to the front porch of my Phoenix home, breathing in the dry desert air that still carried the coolness of night. The sunrise painted the mountains in shades of gold and purple, a sight that usually brought me peace after 38 years of calling Arizona home. But today, the beauty felt hollow, like looking at a postcard instead of living a moment. My phone remained silent on the kitchen counter. No text messages, no missed calls, no acknowledgement that today held any significance beyond another Sunday in June. I'd raised Melissa as a single mother after her father walked out when she was 3. 31 years of scraped knees and science projects, graduation ceremonies and wedding planning, all leading to this quiet morning where I might as well have been invisible. At 7:15, my neighbor's son Timothy knocked on my door with the enthusiasm that only a 7-year-old can muster. His gap-toothed grin and the crumpled card in his small hands brought the first genuine smile to my face all morning. "Happy Father's Day, Miss Rachel," he announced proudly, apparently having appointed himself as the neighborhood's official celebration coordinator. "I know you're not a father, but you fix things and teach me about plants, so you're close enough." The card featured a stick figure drawing of us in my backyard garden, with myself wearing what appeared to be a purple dress and a tool belt, while Timothy held a watering can nearly as large as himself. Inside, his mother had helped him write, "Thank you for being like family." "Timothy, this is absolutely beautiful," I told him, and meant it completely. "Would you like some orange juice? I think I have some of those cookies you like." We sat on my porch swing while he chatted about his latest discoveries in the garden we'd been tending together. His natural curiosity about how seeds became flowers reminded me of Melissa at that age, when every day brought new questions and adventures, before life became complicated by expectations and disappointments. At 8:30, my phone finally buzzed with activity, but instead of a message from Melissa, it was a notification that she'd posted new photos on social media. I opened the app with the same mixture of hope and dread that had become my routine whenever her name appeared on my screen. The photos took my breath away, but not in the way a mother expects on Father's Day. Melissa had orchestrated an elaborate celebration for her father-in-law Richard, complete with a custom photo book, professional family portraits, and what appeared to be a catered brunch in their backyard. The decorations were stunning, with balloons spelling out "World's Best Dad" and a dessert table that looked like something from a magazine. Richard sat at the head of a beautifully decorated table, surrounded by Melissa, her husband David, and their 2 children, 8-year-old Sophie and 5-year-old Lucas. Everyone wore coordinated outfits in navy blue and white. Richard beamed while opening gifts that clearly represented significant time and financial investment. A new golf bag, expensive cologne, what looked like a watch, and several wrapped boxes. The captions made my chest tighten with each word. "Celebrating the most incredible father and grandfather we know. Richard, you've shown us what unconditional love looks like. Thank you for raising the man of my dreams and for loving our family so completely. We're so blessed to have you in our lives." I scrolled through 15 photos of their perfect celebration, each image a testament to the thought and effort Melissa had invested in honoring Richard. Professional photography captured every smile, every hug, every moment of what appeared to be a flawless family gathering. The final photo showed Richard surrounded by handmade cards from Sophie and Lucas, his face glowing with grandfatherly pride. The silence in my own house felt deafening by comparison. No coordinated outfits, no professional photographs, no handmade cards from grandchildren who lived 40 minutes away but might as well have been on another planet for how often I saw them. Just me, Timothy's crayon drawing, and the growing realization that I'd somehow become an afterthought in my own daughter's life. I set my phone face down on the porch swing and watched Timothy chase a butterfly through my rose garden. His innocent joy highlighted the stark contrast between his simple appreciation and my daughter's calculated neglect. A 7-year-old neighbor had thought to acknowledge my role in his life while my own child had forgotten I existed. By 10 o'clock, the silence had become unbearable. I called Melissa's number, my finger hovering over her contact information for several minutes before finally pressing the button. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail, her cheerful recorded voice instructing callers to leave a message and promising to return calls soon. "Hi, sweetheart, it's Mom," I began, trying to keep my tone light despite the hurt building in my throat. "Just wanted to say good morning and see how your Father's Day celebration is going. The photos looked beautiful. Give my love to David and the kids. Hope we can catch up soon." I ended the call feeling more isolated than before. Even my attempt to reach out had fallen into the void of unanswered messages that seemed to characterize our relationship lately. When had we become strangers who happened to share DNA and occasional holiday obligations? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The morning stretched ahead of me with nothing planned and no one expecting my presence anywhere. I deliberately kept my schedule clear, hoping Melissa might suggest spending time together, or at least call to chat. Instead, I faced an empty day that served as a stark reminder of how peripheral I'd become in her world. I walked through my house, a 4-bedroom ranch-style home that had once echoed with Melissa's laughter and the sounds of friends coming and going. Now it felt oversized and underutilized, like a museum of memories rather than a living space. Her childhood bedroom remained exactly as she'd left it when she moved out at 22, complete with high school trophies and college pennants that no one ever saw. In my home office, I sat at the desk where I'd helped her with countless homework assignments, college applications, and later, job interview preparation. The same desk where I now managed my accounting practice and handled the financial planning that had allowed me to build a comfortable life despite years of single parenthood. My success felt meaningless when measured against the silence from the person I'd worked so hard to provide for. At 11:30, my phone buzzed with a text from my sister Janet, who lived in Colorado with her own family. "Happy Father's Day to the best single mom I know. Remember when Melissa used to make you breakfast in bed and call you the dad and mom all rolled into one? You deserve better than this silence, Rach." Janet's message brought tears I'd been fighting all morning. She remembered what I was starting to doubt myself, that there had been years when Melissa appreciated everything I'd sacrificed and provided. Years when Father's Day meant celebrating me as the parent who'd filled both roles, who'd attended every school play and soccer game, who'd worked late into the night to afford dance lessons and summer camps and college tuition. The transformation had been gradual, so subtle that I'd initially attributed it to normal adult independence. After Melissa married David 5 years ago, her attention naturally shifted toward building her new family. When Sophie and Lucas were born, her focus understandably centered on her children's needs. But somewhere in that transition, I'd been demoted from central figure to occasional supporting character in her life narrative. Richard's prominence in their family dynamics hadn't happened overnight either. David's father had been involved from the beginning of their relationship, offering financial support, career advice, and grandfather duties that I'd somehow been excluded from providing. Not through any explicit decision, but through a series of small choices that had accumulated into a new family structure where I occupied the margins. I made lunch mechanically, barely tasting the sandwich that served more as distraction than nourishment. The kitchen window overlooked the swimming pool I'd installed when Melissa was 15, thinking it would give her a place to entertain friends and create memories. She'd enjoyed it for a few summers before leaving for college and rarely mentioned it afterward. Now it was just another expensive reminder of efforts to connect that had ultimately fallen short. The afternoon heat had begun building toward the triple digits that define Phoenix summers, but I found myself walking through my backyard anyway, examining the landscape I'd carefully cultivated over decades of homeownership. The desert plants required minimal maintenance, their resilience matching the practical approach I've learned to take with most aspects of life. But even the hardiest succulents needed occasional attention, something my relationship with Melissa apparently lacked. At 2 o'clock, I decided to take action rather than wallowing in disappointment. I called my friend Barbara, who'd been my closest confidant through the various challenges of single motherhood and the complexities of watching adult children navigate their own lives. "Rachel, I was wondering when I'd hear from you today," Barbara answered warmly. "How are you holding up?" "Not well," I admitted, settling into my favorite patio chair under the ramada that provided relief from the desert sun. "It's like I don't exist in her world anymore. She threw an elaborate party for Richard and didn't even send me a text message." Barbara had witnessed enough of my struggles with Melissa over the years to understand the full weight of my disappointment. She'd also raised children as a single mother and had experienced her own challenges with adult kids who sometimes took parental sacrifices for granted. "Have you talked to her about how this makes you feel?" Barbara asked gently. "Maybe she doesn't realize the impact of her choices." "That's what I keep telling myself, but how do you not realize you've forgotten Father's Day for the person who raised you alone for 18 years? How do you not realize that your children barely know their grandmother while they adore their step-grandfather?" The questions had been building pressure in my chest for months, seeking outlets through conversations with friends who listened sympathetically but couldn't provide solutions. The problem wasn't communication. The problem was that Melissa had found a replacement for the parent-child relationship we'd once shared, and that replacement was more convenient, more financially advantageous, and required less emotional complexity. "What are you going to do about it?" Barbara asked, her tone shifting toward practical problem-solving. "You can't keep hoping things will change on their own." That question would prove to be more prophetic than either of us realized at the time, because later that evening, as I sat in my quiet house scrolling through more photos of Richard's perfect Father's Day celebration, I would make a decision that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of multiple lives. But in that moment, I simply felt tired of being disappointed and ready for some kind of change. "I don't know yet," I told Barbara honestly, "but I know I can't keep accepting this level of indifference from someone I've given everything to support." We talked for another hour, discussing the complexities of parent-adult-child relationships and the challenges of maintaining connections when geographical distance and different priorities created natural barriers. Barbara reminded me that I'd successfully navigated much more difficult situations during Melissa's childhood and teenage years, suggesting that this current challenge might also have solutions I hadn't yet considered. After ending our conversation, I found myself in my home office again, this time opening the filing cabinet where I kept important financial documents. Near the back, in a folder labeled Future Projects, I located the paperwork I'd been quietly reviewing for the past 6 months. Purchase agreements, inspection reports, and loan documentation for a property I'd been considering as an investment opportunity. The house was a beautiful 4-bedroom home in Scottsdale, located in the same neighborhood where Melissa and David had been renting a smaller place for the past 3 years. They'd mentioned multiple times how much they loved the area, how perfect it would be for raising children, and how they dreamed of eventually owning something similar but couldn't afford the down payment or qualify for the mortgage payments on David's teacher's salary. I'd initially viewed purchasing the property as a way to help them build equity while providing myself with rental income and property appreciation. The plan had been a surprise, a way to secure their family's future while strengthening our relationship through practical support. But sitting in my office on Father's Day evening, forgotten and replaced by someone who'd contributed nothing to Melissa's upbringing, I began to reconsider the wisdom of that investment. The paperwork showed I could still withdraw from the purchase agreement with minimal financial penalty, or I could proceed and find different tenants who would appreciate the opportunity I was offering. The house was scheduled to close in 2 weeks. I'd been planning to surprise Melissa and David with the news after the 4th of July, imagining their excitement when they realized their housing security was no longer a source of stress. I'd pictured Sophie and Lucas having their own rooms, with a backyard where they could play while I watched from the kitchen window. I'd envisioned family barbecues and holiday gatherings in a space that belonged to all of us. Now those same images felt naive and one-sided, based on assumptions about relationships that clearly didn't exist in reality. Why should I invest in creating opportunities for a family that had systematically excluded me from their lives? Why should I prioritize their financial security when they couldn't spare 5 minutes to acknowledge my existence on a day specifically designed to honor parental relationships? I closed the folder and returned it to the filing cabinet, but the questions it had raised continued circulating through my thoughts. The investment property represented more than real estate. It represented hope for connection, assumptions about mutual care, and expectations about family loyalty that were clearly misplaced. At 6 o'clock, my phone buzzed with another social media notification. Melissa had posted additional photos from their Father's Day celebration, this time showing the evening portion of their activities. Richard was grilling steaks on an expensive-looking barbecue, while David and the children played in their backyard pool. The caption read, "Perfect ending to a perfect day, celebrating the most important man in our lives. So grateful for family traditions and the memories we're making together." The photos showed a level of domestic happiness that I'd rarely witnessed during my own interactions with Melissa's family. Everyone appeared relaxed, genuinely joyful, and completely absorbed in each other's company. It was the kind of family gathering I'd imagined we might share, but had never quite achieved despite years of attempts and invitations. I studied Richard's face in the photos, trying to understand what made him so much more worthy of celebration than the woman who'd raised his daughter-in-law from birth. He appeared to be a pleasant man in his early 60s, with the comfortable demeanor of someone who'd never struggled financially or worried about providing for children alone. His smile suggested someone accustomed to appreciation and central positioning in family dynamics. The contrast with my own Father's Day experience couldn't have been more stark. Richard, surrounded by loved ones, opening thoughtful gifts, enjoying a celebration designed specifically to honor his contributions to their lives. Me sitting alone in a house that had witnessed decades of single-parent sacrifices, holding a crayon card from a neighbor's child who showed more gratitude than my own daughter. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while desert winds rattled my windows and the air conditioning hummed steadily against the lingering heat. Sleep felt impossible when my mind kept returning to the filing cabinet and the property documents that represented a crossroads I hadn't fully recognized until today. I could proceed with the house purchase as planned, continuing to hope that Melissa would eventually appreciate my support and remember my importance in her life. I could offer them below-market rent and eventual ownership opportunities, treating their indifference as a temporary phase that would pass when circumstances changed. Or I could acknowledge the reality of our relationship and make decisions based on what actually existed rather than what I wished existed. I could recognize that Melissa had found the father figure she preferred in Richard, and that my role had been permanently redefined as peripheral support rather than central family member. The house purchase suddenly felt less like an investment in our relationship and more like enabling a dynamic that was actively harmful to my emotional well-being. Why should I reward someone who couldn't remember to call me on Father's Day with the gift of their dream home? Why should I prioritize their housing security when they couldn't prioritize basic acknowledgement of my existence? By morning, my perspective had crystallized into something clearer and more decisive than I'd felt in years. I would not be purchasing that house for Melissa and David. I would not be offering them below-market rent or eventual ownership opportunities. I would not be investing in a relationship that was clearly one-sided and increasingly painful to maintain. Instead, I would call my realtor first thing Monday morning and discuss alternative options for the property. I would find tenants who would appreciate the opportunity and treat me with the basic respect that any landlord deserved. I would stop making Melissa's needs a priority in my financial planning and start focusing on building relationships with people who actually valued my presence in their lives. The decision felt both liberating and terrifying, like stepping off a cliff while trusting that I'd discover I could fly. For the first time in years, I was choosing my own emotional well-being over someone else's convenience. I was refusing to accept crumbs of attention while providing banquet-level support. Monday morning arrived with the clarity that sometimes follows sleepless nights spent processing difficult truths. I made coffee in my usual mug, but this time the familiar routine felt different, purposeful rather than automatic. I had important phone calls to make and decisions to finalize. At 8:30, I called Janet in Colorado to update her on my evolving perspective. She listened without interruption while I explained my decision about the house purchase and my plans to establish clearer boundaries with Melissa. "It's about time," Janet said firmly when I finished. "You've been giving and giving while getting nothing in return. Maybe this will help her realize what she's been taking for granted. Or maybe it will create permanent damage to our relationship," I admitted, voicing the fear that had kept me awake most of the night. "Rachel, what relationship? When was the last time she initiated contact with you? When was the last time she included you in family activities without being asked? When was the last time she showed genuine interest in your life rather than just accepting your support?" Janet's questions were difficult to answer because they highlighted patterns I'd been ignoring or excusing for years. The relationship I was afraid of damaging might not actually exist in any meaningful form. I might be protecting an illusion while sacrificing my own happiness and financial security. At 9 o'clock, I called my realtor Sandra Martinez, who'd been handling the property purchase with professional efficiency. She answered on the second ring, already prepared to discuss final details before the scheduled closing. "Rachel, perfect timing," Sandra began enthusiastically. "I've got the latest inspection report and everything looks excellent for closing next week. Your daughter and son-in-law are going to be so surprised and thrilled when they find out about this." "Sandra, I need to discuss a change of plans," I interrupted gently. "I'm reconsidering the purchase entirely. What are my options for withdrawing at this point?" The silence on the other end suggested Sandra was processing unexpected information that contradicted months of planning and preparation. We'd spent considerable time discussing my vision for the property and my desire to help my daughter's family achieve housing stability. "May I ask, what's changed?" Sandra inquired carefully, her tone professional but concerned. "The property is beautiful and the financial terms are excellent. Did something happen with the inspection or financing?" "Nothing with the property itself," I explained. "It's a family situation that's made me reconsider whether this investment aligns with my current priorities." We spent 30 minutes reviewing withdrawal options, financial penalties, and timeline considerations. The good news was that I could withdraw from the purchase agreement with relatively minimal cost, losing only the earnest money deposit and some inspection fees. The bad news was that I needed to decide quickly, as we were approaching deadlines where withdrawal would become more expensive and complicated. "I need 24 hours to make a final decision," I told Sandra, understanding that this was my last opportunity to change course without significant financial consequences. "Of course," Sandra replied, "but Rachel, if you don't mind me saying, you've been so excited about this property and helping your family. Are you sure you want to walk away from something that means so much to you?" That question stayed with me long after our conversation ended. Was I walking away from something that meant so much to me, or was I finally acknowledging that it only meant something to me? The distinction was crucial and painful to examine. I spent the rest of Monday morning reviewing my relationship with Melissa through the lens of Sandra's question. When had I last felt genuinely valued rather than simply utilized? When had our interactions left me feeling energized rather than drained? When had she made sacrifices or adjustments to accommodate my needs rather than expecting me to adapt to her schedule and priorities? The answers were sobering. Most of our recent contact had been initiated by me. Most of our plans had been arranged around her availability. Most of our conversations had focused on her challenges, her children's activities, her husband's career developments, with minimal inquiry about my own life experiences. I'd been operating under the assumption that this dynamic was temporary, a natural result of her busy schedule as a working mother. But Father's Day had illuminated the reality that she had plenty of time and energy for relationships she prioritized. She'd found hours to plan Richard's celebration, money to purchase thoughtful gifts, creativity to coordinate professional photography. The issue wasn't lack of resources. The issue was allocation of resources. Tuesday morning, I made the call that would change everything. Sandra answered promptly, clearly hoping I'd decided to proceed with the purchase as planned. "I've made my final decision," I told her, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "I want to withdraw from the purchase agreement. Please initiate whatever paperwork is necessary." "I understand," Sandra replied, though her disappointment was evident. "Can I ask if you'd like me to keep looking for similar properties? Maybe something in a different neighborhood or price range?" "Not right now," I said. "I'm reconsidering my investment priorities entirely. I'll call you if and when I'm ready to resume property shopping." After ending that conversation, I felt simultaneously relieved and terrified. I'd closed one door definitively, but I hadn't yet opened any new ones. I'd decided what I wouldn't do, but I hadn't determined what I would do instead. That afternoon, I drove to the neighborhood where Melissa's family lived, parking across from the house I'd been planning to purchase for them. It was indeed beautiful, with mature landscaping, a 3-car garage, and the kind of backyard where Sophie and Lucas could have played safely. The kitchen windows faced east toward the mountains, providing the view I'd imagined enjoying while babysitting grandchildren who rarely visited me. As I sat in my car studying the property, I felt a mixture of sadness and clarity. The house would have been perfect for them, and gifting it would have been the kind of generous gesture that defined my approach to parenting. But generous gestures required appreciative recipients to create meaningful relationships. Without appreciation, generosity became enabling, and enabling became self-destruction. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. The timing felt surreal, as if she possessed some unconscious awareness that I was reconsidering our entire dynamic while staring at what would have been her dream home. "Hi, Mom. Sorry I missed your call on Sunday. We had such a busy day with David's dad. Hope you had a nice Father's Day too. Maybe we can catch up this weekend if you're free." The message was polite but perfunctory, the kind of obligation-based communication that had become our standard interaction pattern. No acknowledgement of the significance of Father's Day for me. No recognition that her busy day with Richard might have left me feeling excluded. No genuine inquiry about my well-being or interest in my activities. I stared at her text for several minutes, crafting and deleting multiple responses. Part of me wanted to explain how hurt I felt, to detail the contrast between her elaborate celebration for Richard and her complete neglect of me. Another part wanted to pretend everything was fine, to accept her casual suggestion to catch up if I was free, to continue prioritizing her convenience over my own emotional needs. Instead, I typed a brief response that reflected my new commitment to honest communication. "Father's Day was quiet for me this year. I'm glad you and Richard had such a wonderful celebration. I saw the photos on social media, and everything looked beautiful." The message was neutral but pointed, acknowledging her celebration while subtly highlighting my exclusion from it. It was a small step toward expressing my true feelings rather than protecting her from the consequences of her choices. Her response came quickly. "Thanks. Richard really deserved it. He's been such an amazing grandfather to Sophie and Lucas. Maybe next year we can plan something that includes everyone." The phrase, "maybe next year," struck me as particularly revealing. It suggested that including me was an afterthought, a possibility to consider when more important priorities had been satisfied. It reinforced my growing understanding that I'd been relegated to secondary status in her life, someone to accommodate when convenient, but not essential enough to prioritize. I drove home from the neighborhood that would have become partially mine, feeling the weight of decisions made and opportunities declined. The house would sell to someone else who would love it appropriately. Melissa's family would continue renting their smaller place while dreaming of homeownership that felt financially impossible. and I would redirect my investment energy toward relationships and opportunities that offered mutual appreciation rather than one-sided sacrifice. That evening, I called Barbara to update her on my decision and seek perspective on my next steps. She'd been anticipating this conversation since our Father's Day discussion, recognizing that I'd reached a breaking point that required action rather than continued hoping. "I'm proud of you," Barbara said simply after I'd explained everything. "It takes courage to stop enabling someone you love, especially when that someone is your own child." "It feels less like courage and more like self-preservation," I admitted. "I can't keep investing in relationships that don't actually exist." "Those are the same thing sometimes," Barbara replied. "Self-preservation can be the most loving thing you do, both for yourself and for people who need to learn accountability." We discussed practical considerations for my evolving relationship with Melissa, including how to maintain connections with Sophie and Lucas while establishing healthier boundaries with their parents. Barbara reminded me that I could choose to be available for family activities without being the person responsible for initiating and organizing everything. "Let her start making the effort," Barbara suggested. "See if she's capable of prioritizing you when it requires actual sacrifice rather than just accepting your generosity." The suggestion felt both reasonable and frightening. What if Melissa wasn't capable of that kind of effort? What if removing my constant availability revealed that our relationship truly was as one-sided as it appeared? What if establishing boundaries resulted in even less contact rather than more balanced interactions? "Then you'll know where you really stand," Barbara said gently, "and you can make decisions based on reality rather than hope." Over the following days, I began implementing small changes that reflected my new priorities. I stopped initiating daily text messages with Melissa. I declined to offer unsolicited childcare for Sophie and Lucas. I waited for her to suggest getting together rather than proposing plans myself. The changes felt uncomfortable initially, like breaking habits that had become automatic responses to my desire for connection. The results were illuminating and painful. Without my constant outreach, our communication decreased dramatically. Without my offers to help with childcare, Melissa made alternative arrangements that apparently worked just fine. Without my suggestions for family activities, we had no plans to see each other at all. By the end of June, we'd had minimal contact beyond brief exchanges about scheduling and logistics. The silence confirmed what I'd begun to suspect, that our relationship had been sustained primarily by my efforts rather than mutual interest. When I stopped doing all the work, very little remained. The realization was heartbreaking and liberating simultaneously. Heartbreaking because it meant accepting that the parent-child relationship I'd treasured might not actually exist in any meaningful form. Liberating because it freed me from the exhausting cycle of giving without receiving, hoping without evidence, and sacrificing without appreciation. On July 4th weekend, I made plans with friends who actually seemed to enjoy my company. We attended a barbecue where I was greeted enthusiastically, included in conversations naturally, and treated as someone whose presence added value to the gathering. The contrast with recent family interactions was stark and enlightening. That Sunday evening, Melissa sent a text asking if I wanted to join them for dinner sometime during the following week. The invitation was casual and late notice, the kind of afterthought gesture that had become typical of our relationship. A few months earlier, I would have accepted gratefully and rearranged my schedule to accommodate whatever timing worked for them. Instead, I responded honestly, "I've got a busy week planned already. Maybe we can find something that works better for both of us with a little more advance notice." The response represented a fundamental shift in how I approached our relationship. Instead of dropping everything to accept whatever minimal attention she offered, I was treating her invitation the same way I'd treat any social engagement, evaluating it against my existing commitments and responding based on what actually worked for my schedule. Her reply came several hours later. "Sure, no problem. Let me know when you're available." The ball was now in my court, but I didn't rush to return it. If Melissa wanted to spend time together, she could invest the effort required to make concrete plans that demonstrated genuine interest in my company. If she wasn't willing to make that effort, then spending time together probably wasn't something she actually wanted to do. Days passed without further communication from her. The silence spoke volumes about her level of investment in our relationship and her comfort with the distance that was growing between us. It seemed she was perfectly content to let me manage the responsibility for staying connected, and equally content to let that connection atrophy when I stopped managing it. July became August, and our contact dwindled to holiday obligation messages and brief exchanges about practical matters. I began to understand that the relationship I'd been mourning had ended long before Father's Day. That day had simply provided the clarity to recognize what had already been lost. By September, I had settled into a new rhythm that felt foreign but increasingly natural. My mornings began with coffee on the patio, watching the sunrise paint the desert landscape in shades of amber and rose. Without the constant anxiety about when Melissa might call or the pressure to initiate contact myself, I found a peace I hadn't experienced in years. The silence that had once felt like rejection now felt like space to breathe. My accounting practice had always provided steady income, but I began taking on additional clients and expanding my services. The energy I'd previously spent managing one-sided relationships became available for professional growth and personal interests I'd neglected. I enrolled in a photography class at the community college, something I'd wanted to do for years but had always postponed in case Melissa needed childcare or family support. The photography instructor, Maria Santos, was a vibrant woman in her 50s who'd transitioned from commercial advertising to teaching after her own children graduated college. During our third class, while reviewing composition techniques in the college courtyard, she asked about my motivation for learning photography. "I want to document beauty that actually exists," I told her, adjusting the camera settings to capture the intricate patterns of a barrel cactus. "I've spent too many years trying to create perfect moments that were never real." Maria studied my face with the same attention she gave to evaluating student photographs. "That sounds like you're processing something deeper than just camera techniques." Her observation was accurate. Photography was becoming a metaphor for my new approach to relationships and experiences. Instead of staging scenes I hoped would happen, I was learning to recognize and appreciate what was actually present. Instead of forcing connections that required constant maintenance, I was discovering which relationships developed naturally through shared interests and mutual respect. In October, I received an unexpected call from Sophie, Melissa's 8-year-old daughter. She'd somehow gotten hold of Melissa's phone and called my number, her small voice tentative but determined when I answered. "Grandma Rachel, it's Sophie. Mommy doesn't know I'm calling, but I miss you. We haven't seen you in forever, and I wondered if you were mad at us." My heart contracted at the innocence in her question. Sophie had no understanding of the adult dynamics that had created distance between us. To her, my absence probably felt arbitrary and confusing, especially when contrasted with Richard's constant presence in their lives. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm not mad at you at all," I assured her, settling into my patio chair where I'd been reviewing client files. "I miss you too. How are you doing? How's school?" We talked for 15 minutes about her third-grade class, her art projects, and a loose tooth that was causing great excitement. Sophie's enthusiasm reminded me of everything I'd been missing by stepping back from their family. She mentioned that they'd moved to a new house, bigger than their previous rental, with a swimming pool and a playroom just for her and Lucas. "The new house sounds wonderful," I said, though something about the timing struck me as odd. David's teaching salary hadn't increased significantly, and Melissa worked part-time as a dental hygienist. How had they managed to afford a larger place in their expensive neighborhood? "Yeah, Grandpa Richard helped us get it," Sophie explained innocently. "He said every family needs a real home, and he wanted to make sure we had one. Mommy cried happy tears when he told us." The information hit me like cold water. Richard had provided the financial assistance I'd been planning to offer. He'd made their housing dreams possible while I'd been reconsidering my investment in their future. The irony was sharp and illuminating, confirming that my withdrawal from the house purchase had been the right decision, even if it stung to realize how easily I'd been replaced. "That was very generous of Grandpa Richard," I managed to say, keeping my voice steady for Sophie's sake. "Mommy says he's the best grandpa in the whole world because he takes care of our family," Sophie continued, unaware of the emotional impact her words were having. "She says we're lucky to have someone who loves us so much." The conversation ended when I heard Melissa's voice in the background, discovering Sophie's unauthorized phone call. Sophie hurriedly said goodbye and hung up, leaving me with information I hadn't been seeking but needed to understand. Richard hadn't just replaced me as the favored parental figure. He'd also assumed the financial support role I'd been prepared to fill. Melissa had found someone willing to provide both emotional validation and practical assistance, making my contributions unnecessary on multiple levels. The house I'd been planning to purchase for them had become irrelevant because Richard had already solved their housing challenges. That evening, I called my financial advisor, Tom Mackenzie, to discuss redirecting the funds I'd been planning to spend on Melissa's dream home. We'd worked together for 8 years, and he'd been aware of my intention to make a substantial real estate investment for my daughter's benefit. "I'm glad you're reconsidering," Tom said frankly when I explained the situation. "From a financial perspective, that purchase would have been generous to the point of imprudence. The rental income wouldn't have justified the investment, and carrying costs would have made it essentially a gift disguised as business." Tom had been diplomatically skeptical of my house buying plan from the beginning, though he'd been too professional to discourage me directly. Now he outlined alternative investment strategies that would serve my retirement planning better while still allowing for future family support if circumstances changed. "What about setting up education funds for the grandchildren?" Tom suggested. "You could establish trusts that benefit Sophie and Lucas directly without requiring their parents' involvement in management decisions." The idea appealed to me because it addressed my desire to support the children while acknowledging the reality of my relationship with Melissa. Sophie and Lucas were innocent parties in the adult dynamics that had created distance between generations. They deserved opportunities for education and advancement regardless of their parents' choices about family relationships. "Let's set up modest education trusts," I decided, "enough to make a meaningful difference in their futures, but structured so the funds can't be accessed or redirected by anyone except the beneficiaries when they reach college age." Tom began outlining the legal and financial framework for establishing such trusts, including provisions that would protect the funds from being borrowed against or used for purposes other than education. The process would take several weeks to complete, but it felt like the right balance between supporting my grandchildren and maintaining appropriate boundaries with their parents. In November, I attended my first photography exhibition featuring work by students from Maria's classes. My contribution was a series of desert landscape photographs taken during early morning hikes in the Phoenix Mountain Preserve. The images captured the stark beauty of saguaro cacti silhouetted against sunrise skies, their imposing presence both solitary and magnificent. "Your photographs have a sense of resilience about them," commented Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a retired university professor who'd also been taking the photography class. "These cacti survive and thrive in harsh conditions by developing strong root systems and conservative resource management." Her observation resonated beyond photography critique. Like the desert plants I'd been documenting, I was learning to thrive in challenging conditions by developing stronger boundaries and more selective resource allocation. The harsh beauty of the Arizona landscape reflected my own process of adaptation and growth. During the exhibition reception, I found myself in conversation with several other students who'd also used photography as a tool for processing life transitions. Maria had apparently attracted a diverse group of adults who were using creative expression to navigate divorce, retirement, career changes, and family evolution. The shared experience of reinventing ourselves through art created immediate connections that felt more substantial than many relationships I'd maintained for years. "Would you be interested in joining our hiking photography group?" asked Robert Chen, a widower in his early 60s who'd been documenting Arizona's state parks since moving from Minnesota the previous year. "We meet twice monthly for sunrise shoots in different locations around the valley." The invitation represented exactly the kind of opportunity I'd been hoping to discover. New activities with like-minded people who shared my interests and respected my time. I accepted immediately, looking forward to expanding both my photography skills and my social circle beyond the narrow confines of family obligation. December approached with none of the anxiety that had characterized previous holiday seasons. Instead of planning elaborate celebrations that might go unappreciated, I was designing a holiday schedule that reflected my actual preferences and relationships. Christmas Day would be spent with Barbara and her extended family, who'd invited me to join their annual gathering. New Year's Eve would involve the photography group's planned expedition to capture fireworks over Tempe Town Lake. On December 15th, Melissa called unexpectedly, her voice carrying a tone I hadn't heard in months. She sounded nervous, almost apologetic, which was unusual for someone who rarely acknowledged that apologies might be necessary. "Mom, I know we haven't talked much lately, and I wanted to reach out about Christmas plans," she began carefully. "The kids have been asking about you, and David thinks we should get together as a family." The call felt calculated rather than spontaneous, as if she'd been prompted to reach out by circumstances I wasn't aware of. Her mention of David's opinion was particularly telling, since he rarely initiated family planning and generally deferred to Melissa's preferences about social arrangements. "That's thoughtful of you to call," I replied neutrally, not committing to anything immediately. "What kind of gathering were you thinking about?" "Maybe Christmas Eve dinner at our new house? Richard will be there too, of course, since he's spending the holidays with us. I thought it might be nice for everyone to be together." The invitation included Richard as a central figure, confirming that any gathering would revolve around his comfort and preferences rather than creating space for rebuilding our relationship. I would be invited as an additional guest to a celebration designed for someone else, which was exactly the dynamic I'd been working to change. "I appreciate the invitation," I said carefully, "but I've already made other plans for Christmas Eve. Maybe we could arrange something earlier in December that works for both of our schedules." The silence on the other end suggested Melissa hadn't expected me to decline or propose alternatives. She was accustomed to my immediate acceptance of whatever arrangements she offered, regardless of timing or my existing commitments. "Oh," she said finally, "well, what about Christmas Day then? Surely you don't have plans for both days?" Her assumption that I wouldn't have holiday plans revealed how little she understood my current life. She was operating under outdated information about my social situation, apparently unaware that I'd been developing friendships and activities that didn't revolve around waiting for her attention. "Actually, I do have plans for Christmas Day as well," I informed her. "I'm spending it with friends who invited me weeks ago. If you'd like to get together over the holidays, we'll need to find a different day that works for both of us." This time the silence lasted longer, and I could practically hear Melissa processing the reality that I had a social life independent of her family schedule. The idea that I might have priorities and commitments that didn't automatically defer to her convenience seemed genuinely surprising to her. "When would work for you then?" she asked, her tone slightly defensive. "I'm free most evenings next week, or we could do something on the weekend before Christmas. Why don't you check your calendar and let me know what works best for your family?" The conversation ended with vague promises to coordinate schedules and follow up soon. But days passed without further communication from Melissa, suggesting that making specific plans required more effort than she was willing to invest. Her initial outreach had probably been motivated by external pressure rather than genuine desire to reconnect. And my failure to accept her minimal offerings had eliminated her motivation to pursue the matter further. On December 20th, I received a text message that provided context for Melissa's unexpected holiday invitation. The message wasn't from her, but from my sister Janet in Colorado. "Ratch, I don't know if you've heard, but Richard had a heart attack last week. He's stable now but going to need surgery after the holidays. Melissa called me asking if I thought she should invite you for Christmas since the family is going through a difficult time. I told her that was something she should discuss with you directly." The information explained everything about Melissa's recent call and her unusual nervousness. She hadn't reached out because she missed me or wanted to repair our relationship. She'd reached out because Richard's health crisis had reminded her that family connections might be important during challenging times. My presence was being requested as insurance against potential loss, not as valued participation in their lives. The pattern was depressingly familiar. Melissa made contact when she needed something, whether that was childcare assistance, emotional support during difficult periods, or the comfort of knowing family backup was available during crises. But she showed no interest in maintaining relationships during stable times, when my presence offered companionship rather than utility. I decided not to respond to Janet's information or reach out to Melissa about Richard's health situation. If she wanted my support during her family crisis, she could ask for it directly, instead of manipulating circumstances to secure my availability. If she wanted to discuss Richard's condition and its impact on their household, she could initiate that conversation honestly, rather than disguising it as holiday planning. Christmas week passed quietly, with no further contact from Melissa despite the family medical situation that had apparently prompted her initial outreach. The silence confirmed my assessment that her invitation had been motivated by convenience rather than connection. When I didn't immediately accept her minimal offering, she'd apparently found alternative solutions to whatever support needs had prompted her call. Barbara's family Christmas celebration was exactly what I needed, filled with genuine warmth and inclusion. Her adult children treated me like an honorary aunt, asking about my photography projects and sharing stories about their own creative pursuits. Her grandchildren, ranging in age from 6 to 14, seemed delighted to have an extra adult interested in their holiday excitement and willing to help with new toys and games. "You look happier than I've seen you in years," Barbara observed while we cleaned up after Christmas dinner. "The change in your energy is remarkable." She was right. I felt lighter, more present, genuinely engaged with the people around me, instead of constantly managing anxiety about relationships that required careful navigation. The contrast with previous holiday seasons was striking, when I'd spent celebrations hoping Melissa would call or worrying about whether I'd said the right things during brief family interactions. "I finally stopped trying to force relationships that don't want to exist," I explained while wrapping leftover turkey. "It's amazing how much energy that frees up for relationships that do want to exist." The photography group's New Year's Eve fireworks expedition proved to be the perfect ending to a year of transformation. We positioned ourselves along the lakeshore with tripods and telephoto lenses, capturing bursts of color reflected in the water while Phoenix celebrated around us. The technical challenges of night photography required complete focus, leaving no mental space for dwelling on family disappointments or relationship regrets. "Here's to new perspectives," toasted Maria Santos as midnight approached, raising her thermos of hot chocolate toward the Phoenix skyline. "May we all continue seeing beauty that actually exists instead of mourning beauty that never was." Her words felt prophetic as 2025 began. I had indeed learned to see beauty that actually existed, in desert landscapes and sunrise hikes, in genuine friendships and creative pursuits, in relationships built on mutual respect rather than genetic obligation. The pain of recognizing Melissa's indifference had been necessary to discover connections that offered real warmth and appreciation. January brought news that Richard's surgery had been successful and he was recovering well. The information came through Janet rather than directly from Melissa, confirming that our communication pattern hadn't changed despite the family medical crisis. I was glad Richard was healthy, both for his own sake and because his continued presence in their lives meant Melissa's support needs were being met by someone who enjoyed providing it. In February, I celebrated my 57th birthday with a hiking photography expedition to Sedona, accompanied by several members of our group who'd become genuine friends over the past months. The red rock formations provided spectacular subjects for our cameras, but more importantly, the day was filled with laughter, interesting conversations, and the comfortable companionship of people who chose to spend time together because they enjoyed each other's company. "Happy birthday, Rachel," said Robert Chen as we paused on Cathedral Rock to admire the panoramic view of the valley below. "Thank you for bringing such positive energy to our group. You've made all of our adventures more enjoyable." The birthday acknowledgement was simple but meaningful, representing the kind of genuine appreciation I'd been seeking in my relationship with Melissa. Robert and the others had noticed my contributions to their group dynamic and expressed gratitude naturally, without being prompted or obligated to do so. That evening, I received a text from Melissa wishing me happy birthday and apologizing for not calling. The message was brief and felt perfunctory, sent more from obligation than affection. She mentioned that the kids had made me cards but hadn't had a chance to mail them yet, which seemed unlikely since my birthday wasn't a surprise and mailing cards required minimal effort. I responded with a simple thank you, not attempting to extend the conversation or suggest getting together to celebrate. If Melissa wanted to acknowledge my birthday meaningfully, she could make the effort to arrange something special. If she preferred to handle it through brief text messages, that was also fine, but it accurately represented the level of investment she was willing to make in our relationship. March brought an unexpected development that would test my new boundaries more directly than anything I'd encountered since beginning this process of relationship redefinition. Sandra Martinez, my former realtor, called with information about a property that had just come on the market. "Rachel, I know you withdrew from that purchase last year, but I thought you should know that your daughter's rental house is being sold by the current owner. The family will need to either purchase it themselves or find alternative housing by the end of June." The information was professionally relevant since Sandra maintained relationships with clients even when specific transactions didn't proceed. But she was also aware of the family dynamics that had influenced my previous decision, making her call more complex than simple real estate notification. "Are they planning to purchase it?" I asked, though I suspected the answer based on what Sophie had told me about their financial situation during our phone conversation months earlier. "From what I understand, they can't qualify for the mortgage even with Richard's assistance," Sandra explained. "The owner is asking market value, which has increased significantly over the past year. They're going to need to move somewhere more affordable." The situation presented exactly the kind of crisis where I might have previously stepped in with financial solutions and practical support. The old Rachel would have immediately called Melissa to discuss options, researched potential properties they could afford, and possibly offered to co-sign loans or provide down payment assistance. The old Rachel would have treated their housing insecurity as my problem to solve. The new Rachel recognized that housing was a basic adult responsibility that Melissa and David needed to manage independently. They were both employed, capable adults with access to rental listings and mortgage brokers. If they needed financial assistance, they could ask for it directly rather than expecting me to monitor their situation and offer unsolicited solutions. "Thank you for letting me know," I told Sandra. "I appreciate you keeping me informed, but I won't be getting involved in their housing search this time." Sandra's brief pause suggested she was processing the difference between my current response and my previous eagerness to help with their real estate needs. Professional discretion prevented her from commenting directly, but her tone carried understanding when she wished me well and ended the call. Over the following weeks, I waited to see whether Melissa would reach out about their housing situation. The waiting wasn't anxious or hopeful, just curious about whether she would ask for help when facing genuine need rather than expecting me to volunteer assistance automatically. The call came in late March, during one of my evening photography walks through the neighborhood. Melissa's voice carried stress and frustration, though she tried to maintain a casual tone. "Hi, Mom. I hope you're doing well. I wanted to update you on some changes happening with our living situation. Our landlord has decided to sell the house, so we're going to need to find a new place by summer." Her phrasing carefully avoided asking for help directly, instead presenting the information as casual news that might prompt me to volunteer assistance. It was the same indirect communication style she'd used for years, allowing her to accept help when offered while avoiding the vulnerability of explicitly requesting support. "That's a significant change," I replied neutrally. "How are you handling the house hunting process?" "It's challenging," she admitted. "Rental prices have increased so much, and the houses in our price range are either too small for the kids or in neighborhoods we're not comfortable with. David's looking into whether we might qualify for a mortgage, but the numbers are pretty tight." She was providing information about their difficulties without directly asking for my involvement, waiting for me to offer solutions as I had countless times before. But I'd learned to resist that pattern, recognizing that my automatic problem-solving prevented her from developing independence and taking responsibility that belonged to her. "That does sound stressful," I acknowledged. "I'm sure you'll figure out something that works for your family's needs and budget." The silence that followed suggested Melissa was processing my failure to offer immediate assistance. She'd presented a problem that clearly had financial solutions I could provide, but I wasn't taking the bait. The conversation was moving in a direction she hadn't anticipated. "Actually, Mom, I was wondering if you might have any ideas about how we could make this work," she said finally, her indirect approach giving way to something closer to a direct request. "Maybe you know about programs or resources that could help with down payments or qualifying for mortgages." The question was still framed as seeking information, rather than asking for money, maintaining plausible deniability about her actual intentions. But we both understood what she was really asking, and we both understood that I was choosing not to provide it automatically. I'm sure there are programs available through the state and county housing departments, I replied. You might also want to speak with a mortgage broker about qualification requirements and potential solutions. They would have much more current information than I do. My response provided general direction without offering personal involvement or financial assistance. I was treating her housing challenge the same way I'd treat a casual acquaintance's mentioned difficulty, offering sympathy and basic suggestions while maintaining clear boundaries about my own participation. Right, of course, Melissa said, though her tone carried disappointment and perhaps a hint of anger. I guess we'll figure it out ourselves then. The passive-aggressive phrasing was designed to make me feel guilty for not offering more concrete help, but I'd grown immune to that manipulation technique. Adults were responsible for solving their own housing challenges, and capable adults could ask directly for specific assistance if they needed it, rather than expecting others to guess their needs and volunteer solutions. I have confidence that you will, I replied calmly. You and David are both resourceful people. Let me know how it works out. The conversation ended shortly afterward, with Melissa clearly frustrated by my failure to offer the financial assistance she'd been expecting. But I felt proud of maintaining my boundaries while still expressing appropriate concern for their situation. I hadn't been cold or unsympathetic, just appropriately detached from problems that weren't mine to solve. April passed without further communication from Melissa about their housing search or any other topics. The silence spoke volumes about her motivation for contact, confirming that her primary interest was in my usefulness rather than my company. When I didn't provide the support she expected, she had no other reason to maintain communication. In May, I learned through Janet that Melissa's family had found a smaller rental house in a different neighborhood, one that fit their budget but required Sophie and Lucas to change schools. The move was apparently successful, though it represented a step down in housing quality and location from their previous situation. Richard had helped with moving expenses, but hadn't provided the substantial financial assistance that would have allowed them to purchase a home or maintain their preferred neighborhood. The information confirmed that Melissa had alternatives to my support, even if those alternatives weren't as generous or convenient as what I might have provided. She and her family would be fine without my involvement, possibly facing some inconveniences and adjustments, but managing their lives independently as adults should. My photography skills had progressed significantly over the months of consistent practice and instruction. Maria suggested I submit some work to a local art fair scheduled for late May, an opportunity that excited and intimidated me equally. The prospect of displaying my creative work publicly felt vulnerable in ways I hadn't experienced since college. Your desert series captures something essential about resilience and adaptation, Maria observed, while reviewing my portfolio for potential submission. These images tell a story about finding beauty in harsh conditions and thriving despite challenges. Her interpretation of my work resonated deeply, reflecting themes that had become central to my personal growth over the past year. The cacti and desert landscapes I'd been photographing did indeed represent resilience and adaptation, qualities I'd been developing in my own life through the process of establishing healthier relationship boundaries. The art fair acceptance letter arrived in early May, informing me that 3 of my photographs had been selected for display in the community showcase section. The recognition felt significant beyond the modest scope of a local art fair, representing acknowledgement of skills I'd developed and perspectives I'd gained through my year of personal transformation. On the morning of the art fair, I arrived early to help set up displays and position my framed photographs in the designated space. The desert sunrise image that anchored my contribution looked striking against the white display panel, the golden light and dramatic shadows creating visual impact even in the crowded exhibition environment. Throughout the day, visitors to my display offered positive comments about the composition and emotional quality of the photographs. Several people asked about purchasing prints, a possibility I hadn't considered but found flattering. By afternoon, I'd sold 2 prints and received 3 commissions for custom photography projects, transforming a creative hobby into potential supplemental income. "Congratulations on your successful debut," said Robert Chen, who'd spent the day helping our photography group members with their displays. You should be proud of how far you've progressed in such a short time." The art fair experience represented more than creative achievement. It demonstrated that I could develop new skills, build meaningful relationships, and create value that others appreciated, all independent of family dynamics that had previously defined my sense of worth and purpose. I was discovering identity and satisfaction beyond the role of perpetually available mother and grandmother. June arrived with Phoenix temperatures climbing toward the triple digits that define summer in the desert. Most photography expeditions would pause until autumn, but my creative momentum continued through indoor projects and early morning sessions that avoided the extreme heat. On June 10th, Father's Day approached with none of the anxiety that had characterized the previous year. Instead of hoping for acknowledgement that might not come, I was planning a quiet celebration of the parental relationships that actually existed in my life. Timothy from next door had asked me to help him make a gift for his father, a project that would provide the satisfaction of supporting a child who appreciated my involvement. The morning of Father's Day, I woke naturally without the stomach-churning mixture of hope and dread that had defined the holiday for several years. Timothy knocked on my door at 8 o'clock with his completed gift, a hand-painted flower pot containing a small succulent we'd propagated from my garden. "Miss Rachel, thank you for helping me make this for my dad," he said, with the sincerity that only children possess. "He's going to love it because it came from your special plants." His gratitude felt genuine and uncomplicated, representing the kind of appreciation I'd been seeking from my own family relationships. Timothy valued my contributions to his projects and expressed that value naturally, without being prompted or obligated to do so. At noon, my phone remained silent. No text messages from Melissa, no calls from Sophie or Lucas, no acknowledgement that the day held any significance for someone who'd filled both parental roles for most of their lives. But instead of feeling disappointed, I felt liberated from expectations that had consistently led to hurt. I spent the afternoon reviewing the custom photography contracts I'd received from the art fair, planning projects that would challenge my skills while providing income and professional satisfaction. The future felt open and full of possibilities that didn't depend on other people's choices or approval. That evening, I called Janet to check in and share news about my recent creative successes. She'd been following my journey over the past year with supportive interest, celebrating my growing independence while occasionally expressing concern about the relationship cost. "How are you feeling about the silence from Melissa today?" Janet asked gently. "Peaceful," I replied honestly. Last year, her neglect felt like a rejection. This year, it feels like information. Now I know where I stand and can make decisions accordingly. The distinction was crucial to understanding my transformation. Melissa's indifference no longer surprised or devastated me because I'd accepted it as reality rather than fighting against it or hoping it would change. With that acceptance came freedom to invest my emotional energy in relationships that offered mutual appreciation and respect. As Father's Day 2025 ended, I felt grateful for the painful clarity of the previous year's experience. Without that shock of recognition, I might have continued indefinitely accepting crumbs of attention while providing banquet-level support, hoping for changes that would never occur while missing opportunities for connections that actually wanted to exist. The house I'd chosen not to purchase for Melissa had become someone else's dream home, occupied by a family who presumably appreciated the opportunity. The investment funds had been redirected toward my own retirement security and creative pursuits, decisions that reflected appropriate self-care rather than enabling someone else's irresponsibility. Most importantly, I'd learned to distinguish between loneliness and solitude, between family obligation and genuine relationship, between being needed and being valued. The education had been expensive emotionally, but the knowledge gained was proving invaluable for creating a future built on authentic connections rather than genetic assumptions. Summer in Phoenix meant adapting to extreme temperatures and finding beauty in landscapes that others might consider hostile or barren. Like the desert plants I'd been photographing, I was learning to thrive in conditions that required careful resource management and strong boundaries. The adaptation was necessary for survival, and survival had become the foundation for eventual flourishing. August brought an unexpected phone call that would test everything I'd learned about maintaining boundaries while still caring about family. The call came from David, Melissa's husband, which was unusual since he rarely initiated contact with me independently. "Rachel, I hope I'm not overstepping by calling you directly," David began, his voice carrying a weight I'd never heard before. "But I need to talk to someone about what's happening with our family, and I don't know where else to turn." His tone was serious enough to get my full attention. Despite the distance that had grown between Melissa and me, I still cared about the well-being of her children and respected David as someone who'd always been polite and respectful during our limited interactions. "What's going on, David?" I asked, setting down my morning coffee and focusing completely on the conversation. "Richard died 3 days ago," he said quietly. "Massive heart attack at home. He was gone before the paramedics could do anything. We haven't told the kids yet because Melissa is completely falling apart, and I don't know how to handle any of this." The news hit me with unexpected force. Despite my complicated feelings about Richard's role in our family dynamics, his death was genuinely tragic. He'd been a good man who loved his family deeply, even if that love had inadvertently contributed to my exclusion from their lives. More immediately concerning was the impact his loss would have on Sophie and Lucas, who'd grown up with him as a central figure in their daily experiences. "David, I'm so sorry," I said sincerely. "I know how much Richard meant to all of you. How are you holding up?" "I'm trying to keep it together for the kids, but honestly, I'm scared. Richard handled so much of our financial support, and now that's gone. Plus, Melissa is so devastated she can barely function. The funeral is tomorrow, and she hasn't even been able to help with arrangements." David's vulnerability was touching and concerning. He was clearly overwhelmed by responsibilities he'd never had to manage alone, while dealing with his own grief over losing someone who'd become a father figure to him as well as a grandfather to his children. "What kind of support do you need right now?" I asked carefully, walking the line between offering appropriate help and avoiding automatic problem-solving that would recreate unhealthy patterns. "I know things have been difficult between you and Melissa lately," David continued, "and I don't fully understand everything that happened, but Sophie and Lucas are asking about you constantly, especially since Richard got sick. They want their grandmother, and I think maybe you're the only person who can help Melissa get through this." His request was reasonable and heartbreaking. The children were innocent parties who'd lost their beloved grandfather and needed comfort from family members who loved them. Melissa was experiencing genuine grief that deserved compassion regardless of our relationship difficulties. But I also needed to be careful about stepping back into dynamics that had proven emotionally harmful. "I'd like to help the children however I can, but I need to be clear about my boundaries with Melissa. Our relationship has been complicated, and I won't put myself in situations where I'm expected to provide unlimited support without receiving basic respect in return." "I understand that," replied quickly. "And honestly, some of the things Melissa has done over the past year have made me realize she takes people for granted, especially you. But right now, the kids need stability, and you're the only grandmother they have left." His acknowledgement of Melissa's behavior patterns was validating, though it came at a tragic time when blame and accountability felt less important than immediate needs. Sophie and Lucas were facing their first experience with death and loss, circumstances that required adult support regardless of the complicated dynamics between those adults. "I'll come to the funeral," I decided, "and I'll make myself available to help with Sophie and Lucas however you think would be most beneficial for them. But David, I need you to understand that this is about supporting the children during a crisis, not about resuming the relationship patterns that weren't working before." "Absolutely," he agreed, with obvious relief. "Thank you, Rachel. I know this is awkward given everything that's happened, but I really think you're the person who can help us get through this." The funeral 2 days later was held at a large Methodist church in Scottsdale, filled with Richard's extensive network of friends, colleagues, and community connections. The attendance was impressive, reflecting a life well lived and relationships carefully maintained over decades. I sat near the back, observing rather than participating prominently, respecting the fact that I was there for the children rather than as a primary mourner. Melissa looked devastated, supported physically by David as she struggled through the service. Her grief was clearly genuine, the loss of someone who'd filled multiple roles in her life, as father-in-law, financial advisor, and emotional anchor for her family's security. Sophie and Lucas sat between their parents, confused and frightened by the adult emotions surrounding them and the finality they couldn't fully comprehend. During the reception following the service, I approached the children carefully, kneeling to their level and offering the kind of comfort I'd provided during their earlier years when I'd been more involved in their daily lives. "I'm so sorry about Grandpa Richard," I told them. "I know how much you loved him and how much he loved both of you." Sophie immediately threw her arms around my neck, her small body shaking with tears she'd been holding back during the formal service. Lucas followed, clinging to my other side with the desperate need for comfort that children experience during their first encounters with loss. "Grandma Rachel, why do people have to die?" Sophie whispered against my shoulder. "Grandpa Richard was supposed to teach me how to play golf this summer." The questions were impossible to answer satisfactorily, but I held them both and offered what comfort I could through presence rather than explanations. Sometimes the most important support is simply showing up when life becomes overwhelming, providing stability through physical presence rather than attempting to solve problems that have no solutions. Melissa approached us while I was still kneeling with the children, her face puffy from crying but showing genuine gratitude for my presence. For the first time in over a year, she looked at me without defensiveness or calculation, just exhausted appreciation for someone willing to help during an impossible situation. "Mom, thank you for coming," she said quietly. "The kids have been asking for you, and I didn't know how to contact you after everything that's happened between us." Her admission revealed the awkwardness that had developed in our relationship, where basic communication had become complicated by accumulated resentments and unaddressed issues. But grief has a way of clarifying what matters most, and in that moment, what mattered was providing support for children who needed their grandmother's love. "I'm glad David called me," I replied simply. "Sophie and Lucas shouldn't have to deal with loss without all the family support available to them." Over the following days, I helped with practical arrangements while maintaining clear boundaries about my involvement. I babysat the children while David and Melissa handled legal and financial matters related to Richard's estate. I provided meals and transportation when needed. But I stayed in my own home rather than moving in to provide round-the-clock support. And I maintained my existing commitments to photography projects and social activities. The balance felt right, offering genuine assistance during a crisis while not abandoning the healthy boundaries I'd worked so hard to establish. I was helping because the children needed me, not because I was hoping to earn my way back into Melissa's good graces or recreate relationship patterns that hadn't served anyone well. 2 weeks after the funeral, David called with concerning news about their financial situation. Richard's death had eliminated not just emotional support, but also the substantial financial assistance that had made their lifestyle possible. The house they'd moved to was affordable only with Richard's help covering part of the rent. Their car payments had been manageable because Richard had co-signed loans that improved their interest rates. Even their children's extracurricular activities had been partially subsidized by Richard's generous contributions. "We're going to lose everything," David admitted during our phone conversation. "The life insurance money will help short-term, but it's not enough to replace Richard's ongoing support. We're looking at losing the house, probably having to sell one of the cars, and definitely cutting back on everything for Sophie and Lucas." The financial crisis was real and immediate, affecting not just David and Melissa, but also 2 innocent children who'd already experienced traumatic loss. My natural instinct was to offer solutions, to step in with financial support that could maintain their stability during this difficult transition. The old Rachel would have immediately started calculating how much help I could provide and what sacrifices I could make to minimize their disruption. But I'd learned to separate genuine emergencies from enabling patterns that prevented people from developing independence. David and Melissa were capable adults who could downsize their lifestyle, find employment opportunities, and rebuild their financial foundation without my intervention. The children would benefit more from parents who learned self-reliance than from a grandmother who prevented them from experiencing natural consequences. "That sounds incredibly stressful," I acknowledged. What kind of plans are you making to address the budget shortfall? Melissa is looking into full-time work, but she hasn't worked full-time since Sophie was born. I'm checking into summer school teaching and maybe tutoring work. We'll probably have to move somewhere cheaper and look at refinancing everything. His response demonstrated exactly the kind of problem-solving that adults should engage in when facing financial challenges. They were identifying resources, considering options, and preparing to make difficult decisions. My intervention would only delay their adjustment to new circumstances while creating dependency that would ultimately harm everyone involved. That sounds incredibly stressful, I acknowledged. What kind of plans are you making to address the budget shortfall? Melissa is looking into full-time work, but she hasn't worked full-time since Sophie was born. I'm checking into summer school teaching and maybe tutoring work. We'll probably have to move somewhere cheaper and look at refinancing everything. His response demonstrated exactly the kind of problem-solving that adults should engage in when facing financial challenges. They were identifying resources, considering options, and preparing to make difficult decisions. My intervention would only delay their adjustment to new circumstances while creating dependency that would ultimately harm everyone involved. It sounds like you're approaching this thoughtfully, I told him. These kinds of adjustments are never easy, but you're both capable people who can figure out how to make it work. The silence that followed suggested David had been expecting more concrete offers of assistance. Like Melissa, he'd become accustomed to having financial problems solved by family members rather than taking full responsibility for managing their own lives. My failure to volunteer immediate help was probably disappointing and confusing. We were hoping maybe you might have some ideas about how to manage this transition, he said finally, his tone carrying the same indirect request pattern I'd learned to recognize from Melissa. I think the ideas you've already mentioned sound like good starting points, I replied. Full-time employment for Melissa, additional income sources for you, and downsizing expenses to match your actual earning capacity. Those are exactly the kinds of adjustments people make when circumstances change. My response offered validation for their planning without stepping in to solve their problems for them. I was treating them like competent adults who could handle their own financial challenges, which was both respectful and necessary for their long-term development. September brought the start of a new school year, with Sophie and Lucas adjusting to changes that extended beyond their grandfather's death. Melissa had indeed found full-time work as a dental hygienist, requiring childcare arrangements and schedule coordination that added complexity to their household management. David was teaching summer school and providing evening tutoring to increase their income. They'd given notice on their rental house and were searching for more affordable housing options. The children struggled with these adjustments on top of their grief, acting out at school and expressing anger about the changes in their lives. Sophie called me several times during this period, seeking the stability and consistency she remembered from our previous relationship. "Grandma Rachel, everything is different now," she complained during one of our phone conversations. "Mommy is always working, and Daddy is always tired, and we have to move again, and I don't understand why everything has to change." Her distress was genuine and heartbreaking, representing the collateral damage that occurs when adults fail to manage their lives responsibly. Sophie and Lucas were paying the price for their parents' previous dependence on Richard's financial support, learning harsh lessons about instability that could have been avoided through better planning. "Change is really hard, especially when you're still missing Grandpa Richard," I acknowledged. "But your mommy and daddy love you very much, and they're working hard to take care of your family." "Could you help them so we don't have to move?" Sophie asked, with the direct hopefulness that only children possess. "You have a big house, and you used to help us before Grandpa Richard got sick." Her request cut to the heart of my dilemma. I had the financial resources to ease their transition, to help them maintain stability during a difficult period, to spare the children additional disruption while their parents adjusted to new circumstances. But I also understood that my intervention would prevent necessary learning and development while potentially recreating dependency patterns that hadn't served anyone well. Sometimes families have to make big changes when important things happen, I explained gently. Your parents are learning how to take care of everything on their own, which is what grown-ups do. It might be hard for a while, but they'll figure out how to make things work. My response prioritized long-term benefits over short-term comfort, both for the children and their parents. Sophie and Lucas needed to learn that life involved challenges and changes, that adults were responsible for managing difficulties, and that families could survive transitions even when those transitions felt overwhelming initially. October brought news that Melissa's family had found a smaller rental house in a more affordable neighborhood. The move required Sophie and Lucas to change schools again, but the new location was closer to Melissa's work and offered better public transportation options for their adjusted lifestyle. David had secured a permanent tutoring position that provided steady supplemental income. "We're managing better than I expected," David reported during one of our periodic check-in calls. "The kids are adjusting to their new school, and Melissa is doing well in her full-time position. It's been hard, but we're figuring it out." His tone carried pride alongside exhaustion, the satisfaction of people who were discovering their own capability under challenging circumstances. The financial pressure had forced them to develop skills and resilience they might never have acquired if Richard's support had continued indefinitely. "I'm glad to hear you're finding your footing," I replied sincerely. "How are Sophie and Lucas handling all the changes?" "Better than we feared. They miss their old school and neighborhood, but they're making friends and seem to understand that we're all working together to build our new life. Sophie has been helping with Lucas more, and Lucas is being more independent with his homework and chores." The children's adaptation was encouraging, demonstrating their resilience and capacity for growth when adults provided appropriate guidance rather than attempting to shield them from all difficulties. They were learning valuable lessons about family cooperation, personal responsibility, and recovery from loss. In November, I received an invitation that surprised me with its timing and tone. Melissa called personally to invite me for Thanksgiving dinner at their new home, explaining that she wanted to start rebuilding our relationship and expressing gratitude for my support during their crisis period. "Mom, I know I haven't been the daughter you deserved over the past few years," she began, her voice carrying humility I rarely heard from her. "Richard's death made me realize how much I took for granted, including your love and support. I'd like to try to do better if you're willing to give me another chance." The invitation was tempting and problematic simultaneously. I appreciated her acknowledgement of past problems and her expressed desire to improve our relationship. But I'd also learned to be cautious about grand gestures that might not reflect lasting changes in behavior patterns. "I appreciate you reaching out," I replied carefully. "What would doing better look like in practical terms? I want to understand what you're envisioning for our relationship going forward." "I want to include you more in our lives," Melissa explained. "Regular visits with the kids, involving you in family decisions, asking for your advice instead of taking your support for granted. I realize I pushed you away when you were trying to help, and I want to fix that." Her words sounded promising, but I'd heard similar sentiments before during previous reconciliation attempts that hadn't resulted in lasting change. Sustainable relationship improvements required consistent behavior modifications rather than periodic promises during emotionally charged moments. "Those sound like positive changes," I agreed, "but I need to be honest about my boundaries. I'm willing to rebuild our relationship gradually, but I won't go back to being available for everything while receiving minimal appreciation in return. My support needs to be valued, not just utilized." "I understand," Melissa replied quickly. "I know I have to earn back your trust, and I'm prepared to do that. Please just give me the opportunity to show you that I can do better." Thanksgiving dinner at their new home was a revelation in multiple ways. The house was smaller and less luxurious than their previous places, but it felt more genuine somehow, decorated with children's artwork and family photographs rather than expensive furniture they couldn't really afford. The meal was simple but carefully prepared, with Melissa clearly having invested significant effort in creating a welcoming atmosphere. Sophie and Lucas were delighted to have me present for the holiday, chattering excitedly about their new school and friends while helping serve dishes and clear the table. Their adaptation to changed circumstances had been remarkably successful, demonstrating resilience I hadn't been sure they possessed. Most surprisingly, Melissa's behavior throughout the evening reflected the changes she'd promised. She asked about my photography projects with genuine interest. She expressed appreciation for specific ways I'd helped during their crisis period. She included me naturally in conversations rather than treating me as a peripheral presence tolerated for the children's sake. Mom, I want you to know how grateful I am that you came to Richard's funeral and helped us get through those first weeks. I don't think I ever properly thanked you for dropping everything to support us when we needed it most. Her gratitude felt authentic rather than obligatory, reflecting actual recognition of my contributions rather than perfunctory acknowledgement designed to maintain access to future support. The distinction was subtle but significant, representing the kind of genuine appreciation I'd been seeking for years. I was glad I could help during such a difficult time, I replied. Sophie and Lucas needed their grandmother, and I wanted to be available for them. They did need you, and so did I, Melissa admitted. I spent so long trying to prove I didn't need anyone's help that I forgot the difference between independence and isolation. Richard's death taught me that family connections are precious, and I was taking ours for granted. The conversation continued throughout the evening, with Melissa sharing insights about her personal growth and her commitment to maintaining healthier relationship patterns. She acknowledged specific instances where she'd prioritized Richard's attention over mine, expressing regret about choices that had created unnecessary distance between us. December brought consistent follow-through on Melissa's promises, with regular communication that felt balanced rather than one-sided. She initiated calls to check on my well-being rather than waiting for me to contact her. She invited me to Sophie's school Christmas program and Lucas's soccer game, including me in family activities without being prompted or obligated. Most importantly, she began asking for advice and support in ways that demonstrated respect for my perspectives rather than simply expecting automatic assistance. When Sophie struggled with a friendship conflict at her new school, Melissa called to seek my guidance about how to help her navigate the situation. Thanksgiving dinner at their new home was a revelation in multiple ways. The house was smaller and less luxurious than their previous places, but it felt more genuine somehow, decorated with children's artwork and family photographs rather than expensive furniture they couldn't really afford. The meal was simple but carefully prepared, with Melissa clearly having invested significant effort in creating a welcoming atmosphere. Sophie and Lucas were delighted to have me present for the holiday, chattering excitedly about their new school and friends while helping serve dishes and clear the table. Their adaptation to changed circumstances had been remarkably successful, demonstrating resilience I hadn't been sure they possessed. Most surprisingly, Melissa's behavior throughout the evening reflected the changes she'd promised. She asked about my photography projects with genuine interest. She expressed appreciation for specific ways I'd helped during their crisis period. She included me naturally in conversations rather than treating me as a peripheral presence tolerated for the children's sake. Mom, I want you to know how grateful I am that you came to Richard's funeral and helped us get through those first weeks. I don't think I ever properly thanked you for dropping everything to support us when we needed it most. Her gratitude felt authentic rather than obligatory, reflecting actual recognition of my contributions rather than perfunctory acknowledgement designed to maintain access to future support. The distinction was subtle but significant, representing the kind of genuine appreciation I'd been seeking for years. I was glad I could help during such a difficult time, I replied. Sophie and Lucas needed their grandmother, and I wanted to be available for them. They did need you, and so did I, Melissa admitted. I spent so long trying to prove I didn't need anyone's help that I forgot the difference between independence and isolation. Richard's death taught me that family connections are precious, and I was taking ours for granted. The conversation continued throughout the evening, with Melissa sharing insights about her personal growth and her commitment to maintaining healthier relationship patterns. She acknowledged specific instances where she'd prioritized Richard's attention over mine, expressing regret about choices that had created unnecessary distance between us. December brought consistent follow-through on Melissa's promises, with regular communication that felt balanced rather than one-sided. She initiated calls to check on my well-being rather than waiting for me to contact her. She invited me to Sophie's school Christmas program and Lucas's soccer game, including me in family activities without being prompted or obligated. Most importantly, she began asking for advice and support in ways that demonstrated respect for my perspectives rather than simply expecting automatic assistance.
When Sophie struggled with a friendship conflict at her new school, Melissa called to seek my guidance about how to help her navigate the situation.
When she was considering professional development opportunities that would require schedule adjustments, she discussed the options with me and genuinely listened to my feedback. The gradual rebuilding of trust felt sustainable in ways that previous reconciliation attempts hadn't. Instead of dramatic gestures and promises, Melissa was demonstrating change through consistent small actions that accumulated into meaningful pattern shifts. She was treating me like someone whose opinions mattered and whose presence was valued rather than just utilized. Christmas 2025 was celebrated at my house for the first time in several years, with Melissa's family joining me for a holiday dinner that felt genuinely joyful rather than obligatory. Sophie and Lucas helped me prepare traditional recipes I'd been making for decades, their enthusiasm bringing life to traditions that had felt empty when practiced alone. "This feels like when I was little," Melissa observed while we were setting the table together. "I'd forgotten how much I loved our Christmas traditions before everything got so complicated." Her comment reflected broader recognition about what had been lost during the years when she'd prioritized other relationships over ours. The traditions and connections she remembered from childhood had been available all along, but she'd been too focused on what Richard's family could provide to appreciate what already existed. "Some of my happiest memories are of our Christmas mornings when you were young," I shared. "I missed having you here to continue those traditions." "I missed it too, even though I didn't realize it at the time," she replied. "I got so caught up in trying to create the perfect family experience that I forgot we already had something special." The evening concluded with genuine expressions of love and appreciation that felt different from previous holiday interactions. Melissa thanked me specifically for my patience during her period of poor choices and for my willingness to give our relationship another chance. Sophie and Lucas made plans for activities during their winter break that included spending time with me, their excitement reflecting comfort with my presence in their lives. As they prepared to leave, Melissa handed me an envelope that contained something I'd never received from her before: a handwritten letter expressing detailed gratitude for my role in her life and her commitment to honoring our relationship going forward. "I wrote this instead of just buying a gift because I wanted you to have something that showed how much thought I've been putting into our relationship," she explained. "I know I have more work to do to prove that these changes are permanent, but I want you to know how serious I am about doing better." Reading the letter later that evening, I found myself genuinely moved by the specificity of her appreciation and the insight she'd gained about family relationships. She acknowledged particular sacrifices I'd made during her childhood that she'd never recognized before. She expressed understanding about how her previous behavior had affected me emotionally. Most importantly, she articulated a mature vision for our relationship that emphasized mutual respect and genuine connection rather than just genetic obligation. The transformation felt complete but not final, representing a new foundation rather than a predetermined destination. Melissa had demonstrated her capacity for growth and her commitment to rebuilding trust through consistent actions over several months. I had maintained appropriate boundaries while remaining open to positive change when that change proved genuine and sustained. Looking back on the journey from Father's Day 2024 to Christmas 2025, I could see how necessary the painful period of distance had been for both of us. Melissa needed to experience the natural consequences of taking relationships for granted in order to develop authentic appreciation for family connections. I needed to discover my own worth independent of her approval in order to participate in our relationship from a position of strength rather than desperate hope. The house I'd chosen not to purchase had indeed been someone else's dream home, just as I'd predicted. But more importantly, the relationship I'd chosen not to enable had become the foundation for something healthier and more sustainable. By refusing to accept crumbs while providing banquet-level support, I'd created space for Melissa to learn how to offer genuine nourishment in return. New Year's Eve found me surrounded by both chosen and biological family, celebrating with the photography group friends who'd supported my personal growth while also enjoying time with Melissa's family who'd learned to value my presence appropriately. The balance felt perfect, representing relationships built on mutual appreciation rather than obligation or desperation. Timothy from next door joined us for the evening celebration, his gap-toothed grin and boundless enthusiasm adding energy to our gathering.
At midnight, as Phoenix fireworks lit up the desert sky, he raised his cup of sparkling cider in a toast that captured everything I'd learned about the difference between genetic connection and chosen family. To Miss Rachel, who teaches us that the best families are made of people who choose to love each other every day. His simple wisdom reflected truths that had taken me years of painful experience to understand. The most meaningful relationships weren't determined by DNA or obligation, but by daily choices to show up, offer support, express appreciation, and invest in each other's well-being. Melissa had finally learned to make those choices consistently, while I had learned to require them as the foundation for any healthy relationship. As 2026 began, I felt genuinely excited about the future for the first time in years. My photography business was thriving, with commissioned projects that challenged my skills and provided satisfying income. My social life was rich with friendships based on shared interests and mutual respect. Most importantly, my relationship with Melissa had evolved into something that nourished both of us rather than draining one to feed the other. The education trusts I'd established for Sophie and Lucas remained in place, ensuring their future opportunities while teaching them that family support was something to be earned through character development rather than simply expected through genetic entitlement. They were growing into young people who expressed gratitude naturally and contributed to family harmony rather than just consuming it. On a warm February morning, while preparing for another sunrise photography expedition, I reflected on the transformation that had begun with such pain and confusion. The woman who sat alone on Father's Day 2024, feeling forgotten and unvalued, had discovered strength and purpose she hadn't known she possessed. The daughter who'd taken family love for granted had learned to treasure and nurture the relationships she'd nearly destroyed through neglect. Most importantly, we'd both learned that real love sometimes requires the courage to step back, to allow natural consequences, and to refuse enabling patterns that prevent growth. The house I'd chosen not to buy had been a symbol of my willingness to prioritize my own well-being over someone else's convenience. That choice had ultimately benefited everyone involved, creating space for authentic change that wouldn't have occurred if I'd continued the pattern of unconditional support without reciprocal respect. New Year's Eve found me surrounded by both chosen and biological family, celebrating with the photography group friends who'd supported my personal growth while also enjoying time with Melissa's family who'd learned to value my presence appropriately. The balance felt perfect, representing relationships built on mutual appreciation rather than obligation or desperation. Timothy from next door joined us for the evening celebration, his gap-toothed grin and boundless enthusiasm adding energy to our gathering. At midnight, as Phoenix fireworks lit up the desert sky, he raised his cup of sparkling cider in a toast that captured everything I'd learned about the difference between genetic connection and chosen family. To Miss Rachel, who teaches us that the best families are made of people who choose to love each other every day. His simple wisdom reflected truths that had taken me years of painful experience to understand. The most meaningful relationships weren't determined by DNA or obligation, but by daily choices to show up, offer support, express appreciation, and invest in each other's well-being. Melissa had finally learned to make those choices consistently, while I had learned to require them as the foundation for any healthy relationship. As 2026 began, I felt genuinely excited about the future for the first time in years. My photography business was thriving, with commissioned projects that challenged my skills and providing satisfying income. My social life was rich with friendships based on shared interests and mutual respect. Most importantly, my relationship with Melissa had evolved into something that nourished both of us rather than draining one to feed the other. The education trusts I'd established for Sophie and Lucas remained in place, ensuring their future opportunities while teaching them that family support was something to be earned through character development rather than simply expected through genetic entitlement. They were growing into young people who expressed gratitude naturally and contributed to family harmony rather than just consuming it. On a warm February morning, while preparing for another sunrise photography expedition, I reflected on the transformation that had begun with such pain and confusion. The woman who sat alone on Father's Day 2024, feeling forgotten and unvalued, had discovered strength and purpose she hadn't known she possessed. The daughter who'd taken family love for granted had learned to treasure and nurture the relationships she'd nearly destroyed through neglect. Most importantly, we'd both learned that real love sometimes requires the courage to step back, to allow natural consequences, and to refuse enabling patterns that prevent growth. The house I'd chosen not to buy had been a symbol of my willingness to prioritize my own well-being over someone else's convenience. That choice had ultimately benefited everyone involved, creating space for authentic change that wouldn't have occurred if I'd continued the pattern of unconditional support without reciprocal respect. New Year's Eve found me surrounded by both chosen and biological family, celebrating with the photography group friends who'd supported my personal growth while also enjoying time with Melissa's family who'd learned to value my presence appropriately. The balance felt perfect, representing relationships built on mutual appreciation rather than obligation or desperation. Timothy from next door joined us for the evening celebration, his gap-toothed grin and boundless enthusiasm adding energy to our gathering. At midnight, as Phoenix fireworks lit up the desert sky, he raised his cup of sparkling cider in a toast that captured everything I'd learned about the difference between genetic connection and chosen family. To Miss Rachel, who teaches us that the best